Hey, Center Grace family, it is another Wednesday, so we're going to continue this conversation that we've been having about personal gospel renewal and why this is so important. And remember, just to set our perspective again, we talk about why this is such a big deal because disciples experience personal gospel renewal. It's one of the characteristics that we believe is true or present in the life of a disciple. And as we've been having these conversations about personal gospel renewal, what we've been trying to do is tie some of these conversations to just daily activities, daily rhythms that we already experience. And so if you remember, we started with a couple conversations on how, like looking in a mirror, our getting into the scriptures every day reminds us of a couple of things. Remember, we drew this little diagram out that looks kind of like this. And we said that every day when we get into the scriptures, just like when we look into the mirror, we look into the scriptures, we grow in our awareness of God's holiness on the one hand and our sinfulness on the other. And we said that one of the things that ends up happening when we realize this gap is taking place, this reminds us of our need for the gospel, for the work of Jesus. But the problem is that if that cross doesn't grow, if the cross remains the same size throughout all of our days, then what happens is there's a space that ends up existing or opening up here and here, and we either move into self-righteousness or we move into despair. And so the key for us each and every day is that the gospel, the work of Jesus, has to actually cover the entirety of that gap. And what we talked about then, the couple other conversations that we had, was on this acrostic JSHA, Yeshua. And we talked about the J meaning justification, and the S meaning sanctification, the H being the presence of the Holy Spirit, and the A meaning authority spiritually or in spiritual conflicts. And we looked at a bunch of different passages and we compared this to the idea of like putting on your glasses or putting on your contacts every day. And then last week we added to this picture a passage from Philippians chapter 2, where we talked about the idea of us working out our salvation, what God is working in. And we compared that to the daily rhythm of diet and exercise. And we talked a little bit about how it's important for us to do those things, not only personally, but also corporately. Well, today I want us to actually talk about another rhythm, a daily rhythm that we experience every day that reminds us of the gospel. And that's the rhythm of sleep. It's the rhythm of rest. And I remember when I've been doing some thinking about this, coming across a number of years ago, this picture of a guy standing in a hammock, literally. Now picture that. He's standing bolt upright in a hammock. And the caption below the picture was something about how we just struggle with our ability to know how to rest. And maybe you're the kind of person that if somebody calls you on a Saturday and you had 15 minutes to close your eyes or something like that and they wake you up, you're a little embarrassed that you were even taking a nap, because it's something like this tendency in us, I feel like, to constantly feel like we have to be working, and we almost feel ashamed if we need to get rest. But the Bible has a completely different picture of what rest is supposed to be and why we need it. And weekly, we know that there's a rhythm that's been established. It's the rhythm of the Sabbath. And we talk about it from time to time. We experience it. Whether or not we practice it well is another story. But what about a daily rhythm of rest? Every day, right, we have to go to sleep. We have to go to bed. And what's strange is that biblically, there's an importance to this rhythm, because have you ever noticed that going all the way back to Genesis chapter 1, the day actually starts in the evening? Over and over again in Genesis 1, it says there was evening and there was morning the first day. And you actually see this picked up throughout the scriptures, that the day for the Jew, the day for even us as followers of Jesus, to be quite honest, our perspective needs to shift, because our day starts when we go to bed, not when we get up in the morning. And just making that shift in our mindset begins to do some deep work in us. Think about this passage in Psalm 127. Everybody knows verse 1, but sometimes we gloss over verse 2. Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. Now listen to verse 2. It is in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for God gives sleep to his beloved. That's Psalm 127, 1 and 2. And God gives sleep to his beloved, but we know the daily experience and the impact of the first part of that verse, don't we? Because if you're like me, you definitely rise up early, go late to rest. And there are moments where you would say, yeah, I definitely eat the bread of anxious toil. So what can this daily rhythm of sleep, what can the weekly rhythm of Sabbath teach us and help us with as we apply it to the gospel? What does all of this have to do with gospel renewal? Listen to this quote from Eugene Peterson. He wrote, "When we work, we are indeed being godlike, which means that it is in our work that it is easiest for us to develop God pretensions. When we are unsabbathed, when we're out of the practice of rest, our work becomes the entire context in which we define our lives. We lose our God consciousness, God awareness, and sightings of resurrection. We lose the capacity to sing, 'This is my Father's world,' and we end up chirping little self-centered ditties about what we are doing and feeling." The practice of rest, whether it be weekly practice of Sabbath or even the daily understanding of the day beginning when you go to bed, when I go to bed, and then ending as we get up in the morning, it fosters, when we lose all of that, when we don't practice the Sabbath, when we don't realize this daily rhythm that God has woven into us, our need for sleep, what we end up fostering is what I call the do to be lie. And we've been believing that lie ever since the beginning, that it is what you do, what you accomplish, that determines how important you are. And truly, when we lose this daily rhythm, when we forget that our day begins as we go to bed, we get so focused on our own contributions and on our own perceived importance that we, like Peterson says, we lose our God consciousness and our God awareness. So consider your tendencies. If you were to draw out a little semicircle, and if you were to imagine, almost like on a grandfather clock, if you were to imagine that this thing swings back and forth, and on one side is work, and on the other side is rest, is your needle oftentimes pegged way over here? I think that many of us live our lives pegged over on the work side, and it's as if we fall into rest, right? I mean, think about how many of us feel like we fall into the weekend. And there's something that's true to that, right? I mean, we work hard during the week and we long to get into the weekend. But what would it take for us to actually shift that mindset, and rather than doing our work and falling into rest, what if we actually understood that God has always intended us to rest first and then to work from that place of rest? That's the gospel, isn't it? That Jesus has accomplished all that we need, and we actually respond to who he is based on the presence of the Holy Spirit in our lives. And so there's this rhythm where it's supposed to go, this pendulum that's supposed to go back and forth daily and weekly, but a lot of times we're just pegged over on the side of work. So do you practice the daily and weekly rhythms of rest and work, or is the needle pegged on work all the time? Remember, Jesus said that the Sabbath was made for us, not us for the Sabbath. And so when you go to bed and when you keep the Sabbath, when you do these daily and weekly things, they should remind us of our need for personal gospel renewal and the fact that the gospel is true every single day. We love you, church, and we'll talk to you again soon.